When you think of the First Crusade, what's the first image that pops into your head? For most of us, it's a famous speech, right? A powerful pope calling on the knights of Europe to go and reclaim the Holy Land. That's the classic story. But what if I told you that's not really where it all began? Let's get into it. And there it is, the big one. The famous call to arms from Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in 1095. He's rallying the troops, telling them that their Christian brothers in the East are in urgent need of help. For centuries, this moment, this speech, has been seen as the spark that lit the fire of the First Crusade. But here's the big question we're going to tackle. Was this incredibly powerful speech the actual cause of the crusade? Or was it really just the final effect of something much bigger that was already in motion? To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to shift our focus. Forget France for a minute. We need to look east toward the glittering but frankly terrified city of Constantinople, because the real catalyst, that first urgent plea, came directly from the Byzantine Empire. So just look at how fast things went downhill for the Byzantines. I mean, it is stunning. In 1071, they suffer an absolutely catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Manzikert. A decade later, a new emperor, Alexius I Komnenos, basically takes the throne of an empire that's on life support. And then, and this is the key part, in 1095, months before Pope Urban's famous sermon, Alexius sends his own people with a desperate SOS for the Pope. You have to understand, the loss at Manzikert wasn't just about losing a battle. It was a strategic apocalypse. The Seljuk Turks just flooded into Anatolia. And why does that matter so much? Because Anatolia was the empire's heartland. It's where they got their soldiers, it's where they grew their food. It was, for all intents and purposes, everything. And just like that, poof, it was gone. And this is where modern historians like Peter Frankopan have really shaken things up. He basically says, hold on everyone, you're looking in the wrong place. He argues that this Byzantine appeal for help wasn't just some side story, it was the catalyst. It's the very thing that triggered the First Crusade. And look, this isn't just some modern theory. We have sources from the time, like the chronicler Echehard of Ora, who totally backs this up. He wrote that Emperor Alexius was sending letter after letter to the Pope, basically saying, help, we can't hold back these barbarous raiders. The Eastern Church is in trouble. This wasn't a one-off cry for help. It was a full-on diplomatic campaign. So here is the real kicker. The first official ask didn't happen at Clermont, where the Pope gave his big speech. Nope, it happened months earlier, in Italy, at a meeting called the Council of Piacenza. Right there, Byzantine ambassadors stood up in front of the Pope and all the church leaders and literally begged them for help. That was the moment the match was struck. Okay, so just how bad were things for the Byzantines? I mean, why would this incredibly proud and ancient empire go hat in hand to their religious rivals in the West asking for soldiers? Well, it all comes back to Manzikert. And listen, this was not just a defeat. It was a complete and utter catastrophe. The army was wiped out. The emperor himself was captured. Can you even imagine? This created a massive power vacuum, and the Seljuks just poured right in, completely changing the balance of power forever. And if you want to know how real the threat was, just look at this. After taking Anatolia, the Seljuks set up their new capital in a city called Nicaea. The distance from there to Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, 150 kilometers. That's nothing. The enemy wasn't just at the gates, they were practically mowing the lawn. Okay, but an appeal for help is one thing. Actually getting tens of thousands of heavily armed men to march across an entire continent, that's something else entirely. See, that Byzantine spark only caught fire because the woodpile in Western Europe was already bone dry and soaked in gasoline. So let's talk about why the West was so ready to explode. 11th century Europe was, to put it mildly, a violent free-for-all. You had these really weak kings, but super powerful local lords who were always at each other's throats. The entire feudal system was basically a machine for creating professional warriors, knights. And with no big external wars to fight, all that violence just got turned inward. Private wars, looting, that was just a regular Tuesday. And then you throw this little social hand grenade into the mix. Primogeniture. It's a really simple system. The oldest son gets everything. The land, the castle, the title, the whole shebang. So what about all his brothers? Well, they became a massive social problem. Suddenly, you've got this huge, growing class of younger sons who are trained killers, they're ambitious, They're bored, and they have absolutely nothing. No land, no inheritance, no future. They were, quite literally, an army waiting for a war to join. And it wasn't just the knights. Life for the average person was brutal. We hear from that same chronicler, Eckhard of Ore, that France was just being hammered by civil war, famine, and disease. People were at the end of their rope. And in a deeply religious age, when life is that hard, you start looking for a miracle, for some kind of path to salvation. So you have this desperate cry for help from the east, and this powder keg of violent, unemployed knights in the west. And who's the man standing right in the middle, ready to connect the two? Pope Urban II. But he wasn't just playing messenger. Oh no, he had a brilliant plan of his own. And this is where it gets really clever. The Crusade was like the ultimate political multi-tool for Pope Urban. It solved all of his biggest headaches at once. Problem 1, he's in a huge power struggle with Europe's most powerful king over who's the real boss. The solution? Launch a massive, pan-European army under your own banner. That kind of settles the argument, right? Problem 2, the Christian church is split in half, east versus west. Solution? Ride to the rescue of your Eastern brethren and maybe, just maybe, heal the rift on your terms. And problem 3, all those violent knights tearing Europe apart. Solution? Export the violence. Aim them at an external enemy. It's absolutely genius. The historian Thomas Asbridge really hits the nail on the head here. He argues the Crusade was designed first and foremost to meet the needs of the papacy. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a power play, plain and simple, all designed to consolidate papal empowerment. You know, the church had actually been warming up for this kind of thing for a while. They had these movements called the Peace and Truce of God, which were basically the church stepping in and telling knights, okay guys, you can't fight on Sundays and you can't attack priests or peasants. So the idea of the Pope telling warriors when and where they could fight, that wasn't new. The Crusade was just taking that idea global. So, what's the real origin story? Well, it's not one single thing. It's not just the Pope, and it's not just the Byzantines. It was a perfect historical storm, a moment when all these different pressures and opportunities collided at exactly the right time. Let's just break down how this storm came together. First, you need the spark, that desperate Byzantine appeal for soldiers. Second, you need the ambition, a super savvy pope who sees a golden opportunity. Third, you need the manpower, a whole society of bored, land-hungry knights looking for a purpose. And finally, you need the zeal, a deeply religious population that's suffering and searching for salvation. You take away any one of those 4 things, and the First Crusade probably never happens. So it all comes down to this. The Byzantine appeal was absolutely the critical spark, no question. But that spark only started a wildfire because the tinder in the West, all of those social, political, and religious conditions, was already piled high and bone dry. Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. When you pull it all apart, the desperate plea from the East, the brilliant political scheming, the raw hunger for land and glory, what was the First Crusade, really? Was it a noble rescue mission, a holy war born of pure faith? Or was it one of the most calculated political masterstrokes in history? The truth, as it usually is probably tangled up somewhere right in the middle.